Hello friends, and welcome to another video. Now, as an artist, two of my most favorite things in the world is consuming copious amounts of art-related content on the internet and acrylic paints. And oftentimes, these two end up in the same category, which is pretty cool. However, I have noticed that there's a little bit of a misconception when it comes to how people talk about acrylics and how people present acrylics. So I thought I would sit down and talk about some of these misconceptions and maybe clear a few things up and give a little bit more perspective as to why people might think this way, and maybe debunk some things along the way. Okay, so let's start off with the thing that I probably hear the most, and that is acrylics are essentially plastic. This is not necessarily true, but it's not entirely false either. So to understand kind of where that plastic ideal comes, we need to understand how paint is made. Essentially the way how paint is made, and this is the same if you're using gouache, watercolor, oils, or acrylics, is you have something called a binder and a colorant. Often this colorant is a pigment. So most of the time these pigments are derived from natural inorganic substances like clay, rust, stones, metals, those kinds of things, or organic synthetic sources that are made in a lab, and you get something called pigment. So that is often our colorant in paint. So you take that pigment and you combine it with a binder to create paint. With acrylics, this binder is called an acrylic polymer emulsion. And oftentimes in paints, if the paint is a little bit of a lower quality, they're going to have more binder than pigment. So the more binder you have, the more of a plasticky feel you're gonna have, but the more pigment that you have, the less of a plasticky feel that you're gonna have. So this is part of the reason why higher quality acrylics, like professional artist grade acrylics like Golden, Liquitex, Chevron, Holbein, Winsor & Newton, they don't have that same plasticky feel because they have more pigment than binder. And of course, this varies across brands. So I think where this misconception comes through is the fact that a lot of people do use cheaper acrylics, especially like if you're making a YouTube video, because if you're going to be making a painting every single week, you're not going to want to use super expensive acrylic paint. It's just not very economic, you know? So I get where some people have like this idea, and yes, acrylics can stick to quite a number of things, which is actually an advantage of them because you can paint on metal, you can paint on ceramics, you can paint on plastic, of course. You can also paint on canvas, wood. So there's a lot of uses for acrylic. And of course, depending on what surface that you're using, they're gonna feel more plasticky than others. So I use an ampersand gesso board, which has a very high absorption rate. So it tends to absorb a lot of the binder, leaving behind more pigment. So I don't get that plasticky feel with my acrylics versus on something like canvas, where canvas has a lower absorption rate and can make things, and so you get more binder stuck on the surface. Okay, so the next one, definitely one that I'm sure most people have heard, and I have heard and even experienced when I was first starting to learn how to paint, and that is acrylics are hard to blend. So are acrylics hard to blend? Yes and no. The way how I see people talk about acrylics being hard to blend is they're mainly treating them like oils. Acrylics are different from oils because some people will be like, oh, acrylics are just like oils. No, they're not. No, they're not. No, they're not the same at all. Not even close. But you can get really smooth blending on it. I mean, I've gotten pretty smooth blending. Is my blending 100% realistic, smoothly perfect? No, because I'm using acrylics, not oils. But the blending is still extremely smooth. And I think part of the problem is a lot of people, like I said, using a lower quality acrylic paint makes it also a lot harder to blend things out because there is more binder than pigment. In order for acrylics to blend smoothly, you have to have a lot of layers. So you need to use more layers, you need to use thinner coats of paint. If you want to get really, really smooth, beautiful, buttery smooth blending, you go for oils. Acrylics are great for more of a fantastical pop style blending. So this is another one I've heard quite a bit, and that is cheap acrylics and expensive acrylics are basically the same thing. No? No? Okay, so here's the thing. Set my tea down. There is absolutely nothing wrong with using cheap acrylics to create art. This is perfectly fine. I've used cheap acrylics before. When I was younger, I used cheap acrylics. I know plenty of people who do work with cheaper acrylics. That's fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with cheap acrylics. But you have to also understand that cheap acrylics, you can't push them as far as you can with the expensive acrylics. And like I mentioned earlier about when we were talking about the plasticky feel of acrylics, is that cheap acrylics tend to have more binder than pigment, and pigment is really what helps to like smooth everything out because it's the pigments that are coming together. Cheap acrylics also tend to have a lower quality binder and a lower quality pigment, which can really affect their blendability and that, like I said earlier, the plasticky feeling. Cheap acrylics are also not archival like artist grade acrylics, and they can be extremely hard to blend out because of their low quality binder and pigment. Expensive acrylics are usually artist grade and they are designed to be the highest quality possible. Many companies do tons of testing on their acrylic paints. They test the binder, they test the pigment, they test the light fastness, they test the durability, they test weathering, they test UV, like whether or not it's gonna, well, it's the same as light fast, but you know, they test whether or not things are gonna fade. And even some companies like Golden, I know, does this. If they find a better formula for their paints, they will actually change their paint formula to either improve the light fastness, the blendability, the durability, everything like that. Cheap acrylics don't do that, okay? They just don't. And that's what makes expensive acrylics expensive and cheap acrylics cheap, is that cheap acrylics are made to be consumed incredibly quickly versus artist grade acrylics, which are meant to be consumed over longer periods of time and have archival qualities. Now, this last one is not something I hear quite often, and that is professionals don't use acrylics. This is absolutely wrong. This is the one where I'm saying this is very, very wrong. And that is because professionals do use acrylic paints. Many contemporary artists from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s used acrylics because acrylics were more accessible and easier to use than oils at the time, especially with the rise of abstract and contemporary type art. Acrylics were perfect for pop art surrealism versus something like oils, which took a really long time to dry. You can do it with pop art and surrealism, but contemporary artists could employ more techniques using acrylics versus something like oils. And there's a ton of modern artists that I know and follow who use acrylic paints. James Jean, who is a prolific artist and who is very well known and makes so much money with his art that he literally has a holographic Rolls Royce, never say that word, but he has a holographic Rolls Royce. He uses acrylics. He uses golden acrylics. So we're essentially the same person because we both use golden. Not really, totally joking. But yeah, he uses acrylic paints, and he had a massive art show last year at the Lotte Museum in Seoul, South Korea. Like, he's very well known. He's done huge collaborations with Disney and Prada. And there's many other artists online that I know of and I follow who use acrylic paints. So yeah, those are the misconceptions that I've heard of. You know, like, these misconceptions are not super prevalent and I don't see them all the time, but I do hear them enough to where I kind of go, all right, okay. You know, and especially as someone who loves acrylics, you could say I'm a little bit biased. I do love acrylics. I think they're an amazing, very versatile paint medium to work with. And I do think it's important that we kind of figure out where these misconceptions are coming from so we can get a better understanding as to why people think this way. And I feel like most of these misconceptions just comes from lack of experience of working with acrylics and, you know, lack of understanding of them. You know, I hope you enjoyed this video. I just wanted to do something really fun and casual. Yeah, so if you would like more casual videos like this, then like this video so I know, and I'll film some more in the future. Also, if you would like to continue following me on this art journey, then feel free to hit that subscribe button, and if you would like to get updates and sneak peeks for my upcoming pieces, then I suggest you check out my Instagram. Okay. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye! Some things along the way.